I've never seen a message from an athlete and been like disappointed in them. I've always been like, I hope they're okay, right? Or I hope everything is okay because I want to make sure that I care about them as a human, not as like the athlete.
Are you running a marathon? Oh my god, I could never run a marathon. You sure about that? My god, a marathon is like 42 kilometers, 26 miles. I don't understand those people.
That used to be me. But not anymore. Welcome to the Marathon Podcast. My name is Christian Warwick, aka Warwick Runs on different platforms. If you're new to the podcast, welcome. If you're a regular listener, welcome back. So it's been a full week or more than that of me being sick, so I haven't been able to run at all. And so there's not a lot of news coming from me this time. I guess, obviously, I have to share that I got into Boston. I think I briefly shared that in the last episode, but got into Boston, running Tokyo in March, Valencia in December, and then next year again in August, hopefully, I'm doing the Sydney Marathon. So it's going to be a busy season of marathon running, or a busy year of marathon running. Super excited about that, which leads me to today's episode and John Green, who I had on. I've been wanting to talk to John for a very long time. I've been following him and Rory on their journey, and Rory Linkletter, for those of you who didn't get that reference, he's been on the podcast. I've been following him and also Philly Bowden, who I know that both of them are coached by John, and I've been really interested in hearing more about his philosophy and all of that. And during this conversation, and obviously some thoughts that I've had before or prior to the conversation, my mindset kind of changed a little bit in terms of the whole self-coach to 225. And I've been kind of thinking that I will be self-coached all the way until a 225 marathon, regardless of what happens. But after this conversation and after having thought about this for a while, I'm going to have a call with John about a potential partnership or him potentially coaching me. I don't know if he's willing to take me on or not. I'm really hoping that we can work together because I think that he's a great coach, a great approach to running, and yeah, I just feel super intrigued after the conversation that I have with John today. So we'll see, but that obviously will mark a big shift or change in my approach to running, and I think that it could be good for me. I really want to, put more into my running and be more serious about it, and historically that has always been something that has helped me, committing to a coach, committing to something even more. And now that I'm a 247 marathoner, it would be cool to kind of see how much progress I can have over the next year. I'm probably going to shock him a little bit by saying that I'm doing all these marathons going forward. Hopefully we can find a way of dealing with that so I can get through all of those without getting injured or having too much. So yeah, super excited about that. But obviously you're not here to hear about this. You're here to hear more from John himself about his philosophy, his journey as a coach. Super, super inspiring. You can probably tell that I am very inspired now. I just got off the call. One minor thing to just mention before this call is that we had some technical issues with the audio every now and then, so I think that it might not be the best. I hope that you're still able to enjoy the episode. I really recommend, or I really think you should listen to this. So although the quality isn't the best, hopefully you'll still stick around and listen. And you obviously know that that's not how this podcast usually is, but sometimes we have issues with the technical stuff. We're on the other side of the world from each other, and that's what happens. So enjoy this conversation with John, and just have fun. Welcome to the Marathon Podcast, John. How are you today?
I'm doing well. How about yourself?
I'm good, thank you. And thanks for coming on. Really, really appreciate you taking the time.
Anytime. Yeah. Like I said earlier, I'm excited to get started, and glad we were able to jump on a call so quickly.
Yeah, me too. Before we start, why don't you introduce yourself a little bit to the listeners who don't know who you are?
Yep. So my name is Jonathan Green or John Green, either one. I coach Verde Track Club based here in Flagstaff, Arizona. I coach both professionals and amateurs, kind of around the world, which is really exciting. And um, yeah, so I was a distance runner myself before I started coaching and found my way into the coaching world. And yeah, now I've been coaching for a number of years. And yeah, it's an exciting job and a really fun job. So.
Yeah, like I told you before we started recording, I've been kind of I've been a fan from afar. I talked to Rory when I had him on a few months back, and uh, I'm really interested in hearing your approach to training, your philosophy. But before we do, will you say something about what got you into coaching? How was that transition from being an athlete yourself and yeah, just your story.
Yeah, so started coaching back in August 2019. First person I started coaching was Molly Seidel, and yeah, just it was one of those things where uh, me and her had talked about training previously. Just we were both part of the same professional team, and so yeah, it was something that just came kind of naturally. We were just chatting about it, and eventually she decided to leave that team that we were both a part of, and I offered just to hold a stopwatch for her, help her out, as she needed, as she found a new coach, and we found we worked really well together. And so, fast forward to February of 2020, she made the Olympic team and for the U.S. And yeah, that was kind of something that was super exciting, and yeah, kind of thrown into the coaching world, if you will. I was still running professionally myself at that time, and so. Quickly ended my own career, just being kind of burnt out and stuff like that, and just not having the success in the professional field that I was looking for. And so, yeah, as we went on, yeah, started working with her. COVID obviously happened, and so that gave us some time to prep for Tokyo in 2021 instead of 2020. And so, yeah, that's kind of how I got thrown into the coaching world. From there, started kind of building up my own team. I worked for a team before that in New York City, and uh, quickly found myself getting kind of pulled towards Flagstaff, as I feel like a lot of runners, both amateur, professional, and coaching alike, have felt that pull of, there's a I feel like everybody comes here to train in some form or fashion at some point in their career, which is really exciting. And so kind of felt that same, pull towards Flagstaff, and yeah, eventually started Verde Track Club, and yeah, started working with, like I said before, amateurs and professionals, which was a lot of fun. And yeah, both I talk to people about this as well, as like, you know, coaching both the amateurs and professionals, they're different but the same. And I take both a top up or a top down approach as well as a bottom up approach, and kind of like, it's just really exciting to, yeah, be able to work with somebody who's trying to run a 5 hour marathon, right? Also somebody who's looking to run or like win a global medal, right? And so that's something that's, yeah, really cool and fun.
Yeah, cool. And I want to go back to Molly and the start of your coaching career, but I also feel like to get there we need to know a little bit about your own running, your ambitions as an athlete yourself.
Totally.
Where were you,
Mhm.
and like at the point where you realized that okay, you were a good coach, was it hard to kind of give up your own running career, or were you very ready for that at that point?
I don't know if I was necessarily ready to give up my own running career. It just kind of naturally happened. I wasn't having success. I wasn't having fun doing it. Yeah, just really wasn't enjoying myself on the pro running scene. I, came out of college and had a decent amount of success there, and then got to the pro fields, and I was just getting destroyed. Very like I think I ran a 3K at my 10K PB pace, right? And so it was just like, this is maybe like this is kind of a natural transition, and yeah, just kind of stepping away from it. There's Don't get me wrong, I wish I continued running on some days, and trying to get back into it, but I think it just I wasn't in the mental spot. And that's kind of where, part of my coaching philosophy comes from, is, I say I have two number one rules, which is, having being consistent and also having fun. And that fun really stems from my own personal experience of, if you're not having fun, you're not enjoying it, whether it's on a, workout, not excited for workouts, not excited for races or otherwise, it is something that, it should be an innate part of running. And if you're not looking forward to things on a, don't get me wrong, there's days where it's, you know, 30 Fahrenheit out and raining somehow still. And yeah, that's not fun. And I understand that, but you should still be excited as a rule, and I think that's, my own personal experience that I've applied towards the people I coach as well.
Yeah, and I find this very interesting because myself, I come from speed skating, and so for years I was chasing that dream, and I feel like very much like you, I ended up not liking it as much, obviously because my results were not as good, and I didn't perform the way I did as a junior. But still, the day I decided to give it up, it was really hard to give it up because it was kind of, two parts of this. One, okay, I'm not having progress, I'm not having fun, but I still have this Olympic dream or this world champion dream inside of me. And how was that for you? Did you still feel like that dream was inside of you, or did you feel like you were kind of over that part too?
Yeah, I mean, to be honest with you, by the time I ended up, I mean, I guess I actually haven't retired yet, right? But by the time I was, walking away or just being like, I'm not interested in being competitive anymore, I was going out for, a 3 mile 5K run or something like that, and stopping after a mile or two because I was just not interested in doing it anymore. And so I was, just so, so, so burnt out. And to be honest with you, I wish I was self-coached at the time. And, I kind of joke the only career I've ever ended is my own. um, and so, yeah, I think that is something where it's just like, I just was trying to force something that wasn't there. And, um, yeah, so by the time I was, I just didn't wanna go out for runs anymore, and, I'm still I'm still dealing with that now of, like, I try to go out for a run and, I have to make the run really entertaining, whether it's listening to music, podcast, or, like, running in a city environment I found is really fun, but being kind of alone in my thoughts in, like, the middle of the woods, just not not the vibe for me right now. And so, yeah, it's kind of I'm still figuring that out myself as a runner of, how do I, get back to where I was really enjoying it and realizing that, yeah, I'm not gonna make an Olympic team. I'm not, I'm not gonna be as competitive. I'm probably not gonna PB again, right? Unless it's a new distance, right? And that's okay, right? I'm just excited. I think, you know, seeing on a day-to-day basis of, my athletes enjoying, like, really craving going out for a run, really excited to go out for a run. That's something I want and, I desire. And I'm working back to that myself. And kind of, yeah, it's I think you can probably relate to this, like you said, is it's hard sometimes to kind of set that aside and realize that was almost like a different life. That was a different, like, that
Hmm.
was a different John for me, right? When I was ultra competitive and everything I was doing was focused around running, where now that's not the case, right? I'm not going to get the Sunday morning long run at 7, 8, 9 a.m. because that's when my pros get it, right? I'm driving with them and supporting fluids, and I'm gonna get the worst slot of 3, 4 p.m. On a
Yeah,
Sunday or something like that,
yeah.
and that's okay, right? And it's fun.
And this kind of, I guess, brings me to us to this, the coaching part of this, because at least for me, what I found was that it helped me a lot that I started building my own business when I quit skating. And then eventually I found the marathon, where I was like, again, able to compete and have fun and
Mhm.
try to improve. And I've really
Yeah,
realized that growth is like, as a former athlete, I
yeah.
think that you need that growth or that progress
Mhm.
somehow. And I guess, like, for you becoming a coach, you were able to see that growth, and you were able to build that for others. So when you
Mhm.
found this, did you feel like that kind of replaced, I don't know if you felt like anything was missing, but if it kind of replaced what your own personal ambitions as an athlete, was that
Mhm.
replaced by you being a coach, you feel?
Yeah, definitely. I think the competitive nature or just trying to be, it was it was so different in a lot of ways, right? But there was also so much busyness associated with it, right? I when I started the business, I like my brain didn't shut off regarding it, and there was no relaxation around the business for the first year plus, basically. And so, yeah, no, I definitely felt that way, and um, recently, now that I feel like I've matured a lot as the business has grown, and recognizing how, if there's any fires to put out, whether, usually those come from the business side of things more than in athlete side of, oh, like administrative, like business, taxes, that whole thing. That's something where I've learned and how to deal with it, right? And I have professionals to help me with that, with taxes and stuff. And yeah, I think with all of that is, I definitely started funneling a lot of energy towards that for sure. And it was definitely a difficult transition, but I've also, with hobbies and stuff, I tried to push energy towards that as well, of, you know realizing that, sometimes if I or I found this way sometimes with some previous coaches, if a coach is so focused on your goals, then there could be a lot of pressure from the outside regarding that. When in reality, like, an athlete puts, like, no matter what level that they're at, they are always going to put the same amount of pressure. Like, they're going to put all the pressure they want on
Yep.
themselves, and having a coach kind of lean on that isn't necessarily helpful. And so I've tried to recognize that and try to balance it.
Yeah. And then, like you said, you kind of started them with just a stopwatch. It didn't seem like it was almost like an official collaboration between you and
Mhm.
Molly at the time. And then she goes to succeed the way she does. And can you, like, just take us through what that did to you? Like, how did that feel for you? Because obviously she's the one running, but you're the man behind the results in terms of the coaching, and that must be pretty special.
Mhm.
And
Yeah, it
how
was
old were
super
you? Sorry,
special.
how old were you at this time when you started coaching Molly?
I think I was 24 when she started,
Mm-hmm.
or when I started working with her, which would have been August of 2019, and then uh, yeah, 25 shortly after the trials, and then it would have been 26, I think, when she medaled, I think it was. So, yeah, no, yeah, it was definitely such a, like, quick sequence of events, in all honesty. Obviously, it really delayed in the terms of, the distance from the trials, from when the Olympics actually happened. But yeah, just so quick. And it was interesting because I was, she made the trials and made the team, and kind of went from there of like, oh, I this is clearly something I enjoy. This is something that's a lot of fun, and I'd like to make this my job, right? And kind of fell naturally into it, but then was like applying for university jobs just as, volunteer assistants, stuff like that, and just not hearing back at all, right? And I felt there was a real, like, difference there between the two of, I'm like, I just coached somebody to an Olympic team, which, some coaches, dream of their entire life. And then I'm, then looking forward and being like, hey, could I, like, help out? And just not even for money. I'll just let me help out and, like, be gain experience still, and learn from you. And they're like, yeah, I didn't even hear back. And so that was something that was just very interesting to experience. And eventually got my own professional, like, heading a professional team, and so that was something that was super exciting and just a real step forward. But in the meantime, yeah, it was a bit difficult on that end for sure.
But then, like, I guess it must have, although you didn't, I guess maybe this is two part of them, because you would think that by having Molly perform the way she did over such a long time, right? Because you first the Olympic trials, and then, like you said, it was postponed because of COVID. So it's just clear that you guys, it wasn't just like a little blank or a little thing that happened for a few weeks, or it wasn't luck, because you were able to
Yeah.
keep the momentum for that long. And
Yeah.
you must have been filled with confidence on one side, and then maybe the other where you're struggling to get those jobs. How was that? If we, yeah, for John as a person, was that a
Mhm.
bit weird? Yeah, how was that for you?
Yeah, it was weird, but then, kind of thinking about that as a, like, looking looking back on it, right? It's also one of those things where, I was, it was in the middle of COVID, right? And so there was, I mean, we were in full lockdown at one point during it, right? Where we weren't supposed to leave our houses, and, training itself was just difficult, right? And so, yeah, I think that is something that, like, is just so it was so tricky to to navigate at the time, where I was like, maybe this the reason why I'm not getting a job is because, of COVID. And that was kind of a nice excuse. And by the time, I'm not gonna say COVID was ramping down, but kind of in the like fall of 2020 is when I started talking to the pro team based in Manhattan at the time. And so about like it was very much a startup. And so kind of thinking through it and stuff like that. So I had something on the table at that, not on the table, but we were discussing it and I was a real candidate for it at the time. And so that was something where I was like, okay, it kind of fell naturally into, the ebbs and flows that were, COVID during that time.
But like now, if you'll look back, because this was 2019, 2020, I guess, and or did you start working with her just as COVID hit? How was that? Was it just before?
Yeah, it was just before. So Molly and I started working together in August of
Yeah, August.
2019,
That's what you said.
and
Sorry.
then pandemic started March
Yeah,
unofficially of
yeah.
2020, I think. So yeah.
So then now it's been yes, like 6 years since you started coaching. And when you started working with her, did you feel confident as a coach? Did you feel like you had, like your philosophy, all of that kind of, was that clear to you, or were you kind of a little bit searching for things yourself at the time?
Yeah, I think during that time I was really trying to absorb as much as I possibly could. I still to this day I still do that. But more so of not having any like fundamental ideas of how I wanted to approach things and, reaching out to my former coach at Georgetown, Brandon Bonsi, and, Mike Smith, who had then been at NAU for a couple of years and had a little bit more experience in the marathon space. And, you know, yeah, just kind of trying to talk to as many coaches as I could about, what they think about things, right? And what works, what doesn't work. And yeah, just trying to absorb as much as I possibly could. Reading studies, listening to podcasts with people, just literally, that's what most of my days were of just listening to things to try to I still have the notes to this day that I took during that time period. And um, you know, to yeah just figure out like what I think. And then eventually it was okay, I've listened to so many kind of contradicting points that I'm starting to and as I'm working with more athletes at this point, I'm starting to see, okay, this is what I think works, what I think doesn't work, and kind of working through that. But yeah, in the early stages it was really you know it was super helpful to have people in the sport who I could reach out to and be like, hey, listen, how do you do this, what do you think about this, and just being able to literally ask any question possible that I thought of like, hey, is high mileage good for a marathon or is it detrimental? Like, at what point does that flip? And what are are strides super important during a marathon build because we're not running super as fast? And how can those help? And yeah, that was something where, or double threshold. Mike Smith was the first person who kind of opened my eyes to that. And that is such a fundamental part of our training block now. And obviously it is even grown beyond, right, with the Ingebrigtsens kind of really pushing the narrative of double T and threshold and the importance of that. So I think it is really just cool to look back on every on some notes and stuff. And but yeah, just trying to really be a sponge as much as I could at the time.
And you already mentioned a little bit of, this learning experience that you probably had since 2019. I'm curious about like if you, because now for those who, I think we mentioned it in the introduction here too, but like you work with Rory Linkletter, who plays sixth in Boston, obviously an incredible performance, and with the level that we see today, that is, I don't know if what you would say, but I would say that it's definitely up there in terms of the performances of your athletes of like,
Absolutely.
yeah, during the time of coaching. And what would you say that if you look back at starting with Molly in 2019 to Rory today in 2025, how has your philosophy or your way of coaching changed since then?
You know, there's certain aspects that haven't changed, and there's certain aspects that have, right? So start kind of with things that haven't changed. It's the collaboration aspect. I do that across the board. With again somebody who's running a 5 hour marathon or somebody who's shooting for a medal, right? With any of those athletes, what I'm doing is I'm asking them like, hey, is there anything you feel like you need, is like that you're missing in training? You got it from a previous coach that you're not getting now, right? And that could be from a physical, like, physiology standpoint of training, like, we need to do more speed work or threshold or whatever, right? Or it could be the other side of things of like, hey, listen, I feel like, we need to have more meetings or conversations and stuff like that. And, trying to, meet an athlete where they need to be met. And I think that's something that hasn't changed and has been, fundamental from, starting working with Molly to, Rory, Philly, or anybody now, right? And so, yeah, that's something that's, really exciting and fun, and getting to know an athlete, right? I would consider any athlete I work with is considered a friend, right? And which is a lot of fun. I know about people who have kids, and like I know their kids' names and their spouses' names and all of that. It's a really like cool space to be in. And then what has changed is constantly trying to learn and adapt in training philosophy, right? Of hey, listen, how do we gain fitness here, right? How do we improve workouts? Not just right, because at the end of the day, you can have somebody who's doing 120 miles a week, right? There's kind of a ceiling to that, right? It's not like we can go do. I mean, in theory, yes, you can. Right? You can do 200 miles a week or something like that. But what's the like cost benefit there? And so, yeah, seeing okay, how else do we fit in workouts? What intensity? I think we're seeing marathons get really fast, obviously, and so in that space, that means we need to be able to do faster stuff and kind of keep that intensity. With Rory, anybody who kind of follows the Strava sees we're doing track stuff. Same thing with Philly, right? And other athletes, Aaron that I coach as well. We're constantly kind of doing track stuff as well as marathon stuff, and I think that's something that's been a bit new compared to where we were before. With Molly, we were doing definitely some track stuff here and there, but having a quote unquote track season is been a little bit more common. And so, yeah, constantly adapting and just seeing, most of, after a marathon or leading into a marathon build, a lot of times we'll sit down and be like, hey, listen, is there anything we want to do different or, we want to change potentially on this in order to get better? You know?
Hmm. Yeah, and first of all, I want to address what you said about being friends with your athletes. That's real. It really shines through. I mean, if you follow Rory's YouTube series or Philly Bowden's series, it's really cool to see, and that is, I guess, like one of the reasons why someone asked me the other day if because I'm on a project to do a self-coach 225 marathon,
Nice.
and then someone asked me like, but if you wanted to have a coach, who would it be? And I said, well, that would be John Green because and I think it's partly
I
because
appreciate that.
of my conversation with Rory in terms of the philosophy. Like I told you before,
Mhm.
I feel like that is probably a good fit with how my body works. And I'm gonna ask more about that to see if that that is actually true. But it's
Yeah.
also that connection that it seems like you have with your athletes. It seems like such a good friendship, and you also touched on this in terms of how it seems like you're finding a way together, right? Like you have your philosophy, and then you have the athletes where they've been before. Um, you did mention mileage, obviously. I'm
Mhm.
curious about how you approach that, because some athletes might approach you and they're fast marathoners, but they might have like 70 miles a week and they're still up
Mhm.
there. I had Jess McLean on, and she said she was usually at like maybe peaking at 72 miles a week, and
Yeah.
she's one of the fastest American runners, like, or one of the fastest in the world. And
Yeah.
so I'm curious about when you are, say you get a new runner, and we can use an elite runner in this case, just
Yeah.
and they're not really running that high mileage, and then you have Rory who's now up at a pretty high mileage, right? And how do you approach that? How do you kind of find that balance for a new athlete that you coach?
And so I think it's funny is I've obviously coached marathoners who tend to err on the side of higher mileage. Molly, Rory, right? I mean, most of my marathoners are doing over 100 as a rule in the professional side of things. And I think, but that's not necessarily the how we've gotten there is because of consistency, right? And so, and talking about it, right? It's again, how I view the coaching relationship between my athletes and I is a collaboration, right? And so if an athlete is like, hey, listen, I want to do 120 miles a week, and I'm like, hey, listen, our previous marathon build, we did 100 miles a week max, right? I'm gonna probably pump the brakes a bit and be like, hey, I don't know if this is a good idea necessarily, right? We're gonna have some risk there, and so um, yeah, but in the same aspect, I think, strength is super important in the marathon, and you can obviously have success without it, of course, right? But, when I look at um, volume on weeks with an athlete, how we come to that decision is one, together, and two, it's not like, oh, how do we get the highest mileage we possibly can? It's, if consistency is there and fun is there, right? I'll kind of reference this a couple times during this podcast, I imagine, is, you know, as long as, yeah, you're not feeling burnt out because you're like, oh my goodness, I have so much, like, I have to go so far on my easy runs every day, right? Then that's going to feel like draining. I've heard this from Mike Smith, this idea of like your mental gas tank and your physical gas tank. And, physically, you might be able to go out and run 14 miles every day. That's fine, right? But the effect of doing 14 miles and not feeling a bit drained mentally might not be there. And so that's where we're kind of balancing things in that aspect. And so, yeah, it's really, just because if an athlete comes to me, is, trying to do, let's say, 80 miles a week, and that's their peak, in a previous field, I'm not going to throw them up to 100 and say, hey, listen, let's listen to see how your body's reacting and go from there. And, it I never want to be the one who's just like, "Hey, listen, we need to do more mileage. We need to do more mileage." It's gradually increasing, and I always give my athletes a range on things. There's some weeks where we're at like a solid amount, or like I said, like 110, 100, 70, 80, whatever. But most of the times it's like, okay, you could be at 80 and 90, or you could be at 70 to 80, or whatever it may be, because the range allows flexibility because we can life to happen as well. Life comes really quick sometimes, and it's a range for a reason on that aspect. So
Yeah, and then you have whenever you've built the mileage up to whatever that is, or what's the perfect mileage for an athlete,
mhm.
then you obviously have intensity control. And
Yep.
when I talk to Rory, and especially listening to Rory on some other podcasts before, he's been pretty clear on how if he did like what Connor Mance did, for instance, he would be dead, because that wouldn't really work for him. I think most
Yeah.
people would be dead if they did what Connor does, but
Yeah.
but I also know that you introduced, lactate monitors and more of that into Rory's training, which is obviously is a great tool to be sure that you're at the right intensity. What is your philosophy when it comes to this? And the low intensity. How much of your training is low intensity, and how much is threshold, and how much is above that again?
Yeah, I mean, we definitely do like threshold is really the crux of what we do. Most of our I don't know percentages offhand. I don't really work in percentages much, but I would say majority of our quality sessions are in that threshold zone for sure. And yeah, using the meter is an interesting tool. I'm I'm quick to not trust it sometimes, in all honesty. I listen to how an athlete's body is feeling. So if we use it as like guardrails in a way, just to make sure we're not getting too wild with paces and sort of working on just to cap things. But when an athlete first starts working out and we start using it with them, it's really a how is your body feeling, and kind of trying to add a sixth sense to things of, okay, because the meter says this and this is how your body feels, right? And seeing if we can kind of track the pattern of like, oh yeah, I'm working really hard, oh yeah, we're well above where we should be, kind of thing. Or hey, listen, I'm feeling really fatigued, but the numbers are low, that's okay, right? We're going to listen to the fatigue, or the qualitative side of things rather than the quantitative side of things, because it's you don't have a meter in the race, right? And so we can't, use that as right, like being like, oh yeah, this is too much, right? But instead using it as like, okay, yeah, this is just a check-in, and to make sure we're on the right path kind of situation. And more likely than not, it's a tool I use to help an athlete back off because everybody wants to run faster and faster in the threshold and have their threshold pace be faster than the other person. And you know, that's great and all, but not if we're breaking outside of that threshold zone.
No, exactly. And I also think that what you're talking about here in terms of the lactate values, a professional athlete who's been running threshold for years or have a relationship to how it's supposed to feel will obviously know more about what a body will feel like. I feel like a lot of, especially people who are not as experienced with intensity control, they might say that, oh, today I'm doing a threshold workout, and then they're going out there and they're running as fast as they can, and slower
Yeah.
and slower for each repeat, right?
Mhm.
And if you use Rory or Philly as an example, they still know that that's not how a threshold workout is supposed to be like. But
Mhm.
then you can,
Yeah.
I guess, like adjust a little bit with that lactate monitor compared to,
Mhm.
they will know the difference between a 1.5 value and a 6.5 value or 12 value,
Yes.
you know.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And it's another tool to use, and it's a great tool, right? But in the same aspect, we're not, just like if you're driving, right? You're not just looking at your speedometer, right?
Mhm.
When you're driving, you're using your mirrors, you're looking out the windshield, shield, you're using the tachometer, right? You're using everything in order to decide, what's the best way to go forward, and that's kind of the same thing as right. We're looking at all these different metrics at the same time to try to make sure we're, heading in the right direction.
Yeah, and I was thinking about, before our conversation today. I was on Reddit, and I've started enjoying just looking through people's training on Reddit, and people are asking questions,
Yeah.
and there was this
Hmm.
one guy who was asking, who had a goal of running a sub 3 marathon, and he didn't really understand why he didn't have more progress, and so I commented, and because he also thought that maybe he didn't do enough anaerobic work.
Yeah.
And so I was like, well, honestly, I think that to run a sub 3 marathon, it's not as much anaerobic, because then you need more of the aerobic, obviously. So then I was like, what does it look like in terms of your intensity zones? And it was clear that this person was training much or working much more in like the higher 4 to 5 zones rather than
Hmm.
threshold, right? And I said, well, my guess is that that's where your problem is, because he was also feeling more tired. Runs were
Hmm.
harder to get through, even the easy runs. Um, and I know that for Rory, for instance, who he said that before Boston, he did much more of the 10K workouts, just to, because he's obviously racing, and the pace they had in the beginning of Boston was just crazy. So for him to be
Yeah.
able to keep that pace, he obviously had to do that.
Hmm.
Uh, and then I'm curious about like your take on this. If you look at it, obviously you have the pros on one side, and then you have people like me. My personal best is 247. So it's a big difference in that pace, and we're competing for almost, like I competed for 40 minutes longer than Rory. So obviously the
Hmm.
intensity zones all over the race will be different, because there's so
Yeah.
like longer competition time. And how,
Yeah.
if you have, say you have an athlete like me, 247, and then you have Rory on this side, what would be the differences in your approach to making that training program for both of us, obviously, to get better?
Yeah. I mean, obviously, percentage wise can be different, right? Kind of going back to, what one athlete's done versus another, but there's not a huge difference with it, in all honesty, where
Hmm.
both are doing a lot of threshold, right? Uh, I'm dressing up threshold in different forms and fashions to make it not boring, right? Where, I feel like with the pros, it's it's not laziness, but it's almost like a, hey, listen, this is just it's more routine kind of thing because they know what they're getting, and that almost that mundaneness within workouts can create a little bit more ability to focus sometimes, if you will, or like hone in with it versus, with amateurs, I might be a little bit like, yeah, make it less mundane because I want it to be fun, right? Versus a pro is going to kind of look at it as like it is a little bit more of my job kind of
Mm-hmm.
situation. And there's no real like difference in like training effect in that sense, right? It's not like the amateurs getting worse training or better training in that sense. It's just slightly different, and it makes it more entertaining, which I think is keeps the athlete more engaged, which is great, right? The biggest difference I will say is pros have as a rule, generally have a really good talent of knowing their body, right? Knowing when something is wrong, knowing when something feels a little bit harder than it should, right? They're going to report really quickly with it, which is really, really, really good. And with somebody who's, yeah, let's say around 3 hours, 2:45, or even, 5 hours, right? They aren't going to be as in tune, I find sometimes with their body. Some of them are like full stop, which is, this is a very much a generalization, but yeah, they're not as in tune. So sometimes they're a little bit more likely to go over, like, crest over the edge when it comes to an injury popping up, right? They might not say until it's like, oh, yeah, what's the pain level? It's like, oh, it's a 5 out of 10. You're like, whoa, oh, that is like far, like, we should have stopped this at like a one or a two, right? And so that's kind of the biggest difference. And so, like, what does that look like from a training perspective? Is a lot more workouts to teach them about their body of like, hey, listen, what's redlining? And I really enjoyed giving a 90-30 fartlek workout where I know it's not the most fun workout, but I feel like it really teaches an athlete of like, okay, if I go too fast in this 90 seconds and I'm not able to recover in the 30, like the next like 5 reps are toasted because of it. And it's learning that balancing act. And I think that can be really helpful. And just again, let's pick Boston as a course, right? It's really fast, it's gradually downhill, and then you have some sporadic hills and stuff like that. And if you push over that edge within the race, it's, to try to claw back and get it back, you're going to lose a lot more time because of that. And so that's something I find is really helpful. Yeah, and that's, part of where we work is like learning about your body of like, okay, we messed up this workout, that's fine. I'd almost rather you mess it up now than in the race.
Yeah, and I'm curious about, when you're talking about that in terms of the higher pace that you're getting used to
Mhm.
and adjusted to, because I would say that, and that is maybe nothing or everything to do with the training, is that when I'm racing a marathon, I'm only racing against myself, right? Because if I line up for Boston Marathon, then I know that there are 30,000 runners around me. I'm not really
Mhm.
competing with anyone unless my friend is with me,
Yeah.
and what that means is that when I start running, I can follow my plan. So I can have a plan from the start. I can know that, okay, in these first hills, I'm gonna have this pace, and then when it flattens out, I'm gonna have this pace. Was for Rory, he has to follow whatever Clayton does or Connor does or
Yes.
Joe. There are so many elements to this that he can't really control, so then I'm curious about those, because Rory talked about, I think it was 7 or 8 times K that he did like
Mhm.
at a bit faster than maybe 10K pace or at around 10K pace.
Yeah.
And at least in my training, I did one or two of them this spring, but I was like, you know what? I don't think I need this right now, not to get to, 245, whatever, because I focused more on the threshold workouts because I thought that it would take me too long to recover from the faster paced workouts. And
Yeah.
what is your take on this? Do you think that, say someone is trying to break the 3 hour limit, do you think that they need to have those workouts that Rory had before Boston like that, or do you think it's enough to just
Yeah.
do threshold?
I would say normally it's fine to do threshold, but I think there's a confidence boosting in seeing how fast you can run. And so it's one of those things where it's dual sided, right? I think, somebody, let's say somebody who's not looking to get a coach or anything like that, they're just they just want to do some basic training to, see what they can do, right? And it might be their first marathon, they might be an experienced marathon, whichever one, right? I think in both of those cases, right, you can just do threshold and the science says you'll generally be fine. I think doing a little bit faster than threshold can be helpful just to uh make threshold feel a little bit biomechanically smoother, right? But I think there is something, even though, yeah, you might not touch 5K pace during a marathon and until the final, like, it's like 800 meters, right? But generally in that space, you're probably not like, you don't need that gearing, if you will, versus, yeah, Rory, he might shift to a 420 mile in the middle of a race, right? Because a hard move gets made and he has to go with it, right? And so that's something that's a little bit different. You know, uh, yeah, compared to the elites, is we need to be ready to shift gears sharply and all of a sudden, right? And that's something I've been practicing with Rory is, we have been doing tempos or steady states and stuff like that. And I say, okay, next 800 meters is hard. And he goes and runs the next 800 meters. And yeah, he goes and does that, and then we do it a few times, right? And sometimes I'll see him at the last eight, like his 800 meters, he's at like 790, 750 meters. And I said, okay, the next 800 again, right? And so it's two back to back. And so it's preparing for those weird shifts that happen. And in Chicago, it's more of a time trial, right?
Mm-hmm.
But there will be a racing part of it, right? Where he will be, against people who are he's gonna have to shift and, kind of, get punched in the face a couple times with some
Yeah.
pace changes, right? And hopefully he's doing the same thing, right? Of really getting ready to, we'll be competing with those around us, and I think that will be perfect, and that's what we're setting up for. And but yeah, to answer your question, is somebody who's just truly time trialing, and not in a pure racing standpoint, we don't need to be shifting gears as much, but it can build confidence, right? Doing some speed work. I've had athletes, throughout the years who, really like ripping 200s during their build, and that's okay, right? It builds their confidence, right? They really enjoy ripping fours and stuff like that, and that's great, and I'm that's something I feel like was a change for me as a coach, was recognizing that it's not just all about the physiology, it's about the confidence going into a race and being able to be like, yeah, I can drop a 40-second 200 or a 35-second 200 or whatever it may be, and that makes me feel confident going into a race, even if it's not, and that's going to add way more than adding another threshold session in that training block, if you will.
Yeah, because that's what I wanted to ask you about now that you mentioned this about the confidence. Because with my first marathon, I had no idea what I was doing. So 5 or 6
Mhm.
weeks before my first marathon, I did one in training. So I did like a full
Yeah.
marathon race it in training
Yeah.
just to see if I was actually able to run it and if I was able to do a sub 3 marathon. And
Mhm.
for my confidence, that was great because obviously then, oh yeah, I know I'm good enough for it. I think that
Yeah.
from a like if I was to be smart about it and if I wanted to run even faster for that actual marathon, maybe I shouldn't have done
Mhm.
at least a full marathon. Uh,
Yeah.
but and you did say something about it already, but how much would you contribute to the confidence and how important is it to have those sessions or workouts for athletes of any level really before a marathon?
I mean, confidence is so key with things, right? And yeah, I think with that is, I I backtrack a little bit. When I first start working with an athlete, I say, when we first start working together, you're gonna get a general coach up, right? The more feedback you give me, the more I become your coach, right? And that's something that's super helpful. Where I have athletes who, we'll talk, we'll have a call before the marathon or their major A race or whatever. We'll talk about things and they're excited and stuff. And then on the race after, or like after call, or the after the race call, we'll sit down and they're like, yeah, I just wasn't feeling super confident. And I, by no means am I yelling at them. I mean, but I might be like, hey, listen, why didn't you say that beforehand? Right? How, like, part of my job as a coach is I want to make you as confident as possible going into it. And, we could have talked about that. And, if you even brought that up 6 weeks before the marathon, we could have eliminated it entirely, right? And so that's, I think confidence is super, super important. And there's times, right? Going to a marathon and you're not the most confident, right? But I had athletes who are like, hey, listen, I really want to do a marathon in my long run, right? Or I want to do, if I don't do over 20 miles or over 22, 23, whatever it is, I don't feel confident, right? And I might disagree with that from a training philosophy, or like, that just doesn't make sense for where we're at. Or, we're going from, because we've had a little bit of a rough build, um, and all of a sudden we're going from a 15-mile long run to like a 22-mile long run. It's like, yeah, we can do that, right? I add a lot of caveats because I want to make sure we're smart about it. But yeah, it's one of those things we don't have to do it, but if it's going to build your confidence, I'm way more inclined to do something.
Yeah, I really like that approach, and I think that, like you said, it's such an important aspect of it, and especially for, I think, for any sport really, but especially for the marathon. Like
Mhm.
if you don't believe in yourself when you're on the start, it's gonna be hard to
Yeah.
perform. And I also feel like a lot of people will doubt themselves, especially with a taper week, and you're like, oh, barely ran this week at all. And especially like for a professional who's done this time after time after time, I'm sure you gain some experience and some trust, but
Mhm.
at least for me, I haven't done a marathon that often, so it's just like,
Yeah.
for my last marathon, I really, during my warm up before the race, I was like, I need to see if I have this pace in me now. And then it felt
Mhm.
good, and I was like, oh, okay, now I can relax. Now I feel confident. But that confidence
Yeah.
didn't really. I obviously felt it in training the months leading up to it, but it still took
Mhm.
that morning to actually feel really confident. And then when you get on the start, and then it's also a balance, because if you're too confident in the beginning, it also might hit you in the face later on in the race,
Yes.
right? So
Yeah,
it's a
exactly.
hard one. But then you also have, I'm curious about what you think about this, because today when I was on, like, in this rabbit hole on Reddit, I was seeing people asking, what do I do? Strava, the Strava predictor or my Coros predictor is telling me that I'm not as good as I thought I was. What do I do? Like,
Mhm.
how do I change my training? And it's like, it's great with all these tools, right? But
Yeah.
it's usually not, especially for the marathon, because when you face the last 6 miles, Strava will not know how you react to that, because that's a mental
Yeah.
game.
Mhm.
What do you think of these new tools that we now have, uh, kind of telling us how good we are, and that can obviously affect your confidence both ways, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah, no, absolutely. And yeah, I think they're great to a point, right? At the end of the day, right? We're seeing AI really coming into the like into the space, and there's AI rather from Strava or from your Coros watch or your Garmin, whatever it may be, right? It's great, but I think trusting your gut at the end of the day is going to be the better better tool, or relying on somebody who's hanging out on Reddit, right? And like willing who has a little bit more experience or has a little bit more knowledge, or even working with like like in person or online coach that you can ask really nuanced questions about, right? AI is gonna, try their best, but they're not gonna be perfect, and humans aren't perfect either, right? And so I think it can really increase if you're looking at too many signs from either side of things. It could really the signal to noise ratio can just be through the roof, and that can be really difficult to kind of weed it out, especially if an athlete is on it's like going to, an AI model for an injury, right? It's like, yeah, it might be this, right? But it's like it's not Google is not a doctor at the end of the day. And you need to go see a medical professional in order to get a proper diagnosis. And I think that's something that is also, in this case of like, yeah, it's great, it's helpful. But to a certain degree, there needs to be some general knowledge, or it's a really nuanced case, right? Because everybody is different and everybody's history as a runner is different, right? How I'm going to react as a coach to somebody who's doing their first marathon and has this issue is going to be completely different than if this is their 20th marathon or something like that. And same thing is if somebody's running 30 miles a week, this is going to be very different than if somebody's running 130. There is really so many variables, and I'll sometimes get people who reach out on Instagram and be like, "What do you think I should do?" And I'm like, "Dude, we don't have enough time to talk about this, right? Like this is like an hour-long conversation, and I
Yeah.
can ramble, let me tell you." And so yeah.
But it also leads me to another question that I have for you, because I feel like a lot of those predictors, they look at the all out efforts that you've had, right? And then
Mhm.
so in a marathon block, if you look at the Strava or Coros predictor, they will look at how fast did you do a 30K, and then Strava doesn't know if that was it can obviously analyze your heart rate data, but it
Mhm.
doesn't really know if that was an all out effort or if it was a controlled effort and you really had a lot to run with. And
Mhm.
at least for me in my training, I know that in during a marathon block, I don't have a lot of workouts where I'm dead beat. Like my marathon
Yes.
will be where I'm dead, but
Mhm.
I'm trying to save that for race day. And
Yeah.
so uh, this is just like a transition into my question about you in your training. How many times, if we use Rory or any of the athletes that you're coaching, how many times during a marathon block do you have them go really hard, like feeling the iron in their mouth and just being
Yeah.
almost dead? Do they have it at all, or what is that like?
It's definitely very rare.
Hmm.
Maybe once every 4 weeks, 3 weeks, something like that. But then, so a lot. The first thing that come to mind are city states or marathon progressions where the last mile or last 5K is pressed quite hard, and um, yeah, in those instances, yeah, it's the last bit of the workout is really difficult, absolutely. And yeah, there goes Philly's YouTube channel. You'll see her on the ground after a
Yep.
hard session, and that's that definitely happens for sure, but it's definitely not very common. And if you were to ask them how difficult was the session as a whole, let's say excluding the last 2 miles or last mile or last 5K, they would not say it was an all out. I mean, it's similar. It's meant to replicate the marathon, which is a gradual build in
Hmm.
intensity and difficulty, and it's a test of strength at the end of the day as well. So yeah, I think it's not something that we're definitely, in a marathon build, not ripping 600s or 400s or twos where they're on the ground afterwards. It's not, yeah, it's not a 1500 meter person's training, right? It's marathon training. And even if we're doing a 10K, we'll touch that on occasion, maybe once or twice or something like that. But for the most part, yeah, we're not, they're not on the ground very often. Or if they are, right, after about a minute, they're like, all right, dusting themselves off and getting ready for the cool down versus being like, I'm going to hang out on this ground for like another 5 to 10 minutes.
Yeah, and I think what you're saying there is such an important thing to, I guess, like emphasize that, because I like what you said, that if you look at the workout as a whole, right? Because
Mhm.
yes, they might have been super tired when they ended the workout, but that was maybe, I don't know, 15 minutes of the workout that was that hard. And then if they were
Mhm.
running for 2 hours, if you look at the whole workout, it wasn't that hard. So if we go back to the
Yeah.
lactate values, like they might not have been very high throughout the workout, but if you tested at the end of the workout, you would probably be like, "Oh, that
Super
was
high.
high." Yeah, but that is
Yeah.
also that's also a big difference, because that doesn't mean that you were at that intensity for 2 or 3 hours. It was more,
Mhm.
yeah. I like that.
Yeah, just a blip, right? And that's
Yeah.
something, you know, even I mean, if we were to take this is a little bit of an offshoot, but if we were to take let's say they did a 2K rep at threshold pace, right? If they did the middle 400 at 10K or 5K pace, and then we test on the back end, we might see a little bit of elevation, but it doesn't necessarily indicate it. And so that's kind of why we try. I mean, the one thing that pros are extremely, extremely good at is pacing as a rule, right? We're pacing within a couple seconds a mile or within a couple seconds per K as well. And so we try to be as precise as possible. And, that is something that helps us, again, get the most out of our training. And that was from, my Georgetown days when I was in university, where that was really drilled into me, right? If we were off by half a second per split, whatever that is, I was a 200 or if I was a 400 or a mile, there was generally people were getting mad about it, and that's I try to impress that on the pros now for sure.
Yeah, and this pacing, the focus on the pace. I think it's really cool to, if you head over to social media these days, it's all about making sure you run easy enough. I'm very happy that
Yes.
people are focusing as much on this.
Yeah.
But but
Me
but
too.
but I think that it's easy to, I think some people, if they don't really consider the whole, they will be like, yeah, but Rory, he's running his easy runs at such a, fast pace, because he might be
Mhm.
like at 6 flat or 6:30, whatever, and then they forget about what is actually his race pace at a marathon and compare that to their own race pace. When it comes to the easy runs, and obviously it sounds like the majority of your training will be also easy, where
Yes.
what is what are the instructions that you give your athletes? Do they run by heart rate? Do you have a formula for the pace? How does that work?
Yeah, I'm very, for lack of a better word, not controlling over things like that. I how I look at it from an amateur or a pro standpoint is generally kind of similar. Is run off the field. I'm going to suggest, kind of give the whole shout out like easy run of pace should be conversational as a rule. But there's times, right? I think you probably admit this as well, where we're in a long run with a group and or an easy run with a group and you get after it a little bit, right? You push the pace a little bit, and that's okay, right? Again, I think where where I'm a lot more I want to be careful about it is not overdoing it, right? If let's say one of my pros goes out and they were like, yeah, I hammered Monday's run and just cruised through it, and Tuesday session goes fine. Then we'll be like, okay, let's be careful of that, right? Because that can catch up with us. But generally, that's all I'm going to say about it. In the same way as same thing with an amateur, right? If I see that they push the pace a little bit, that's generally fine, right? They must have felt good. They're running with people. I think community and running is such an important part, and if that means you have to break out of what is your easy run pace by 10, 20 seconds a mile, so yeah, that's fine. I'm not too concerned. It's when, okay, yep, now we're having an injury issue, or yep, okay, now we're having bad workouts because we're really tired and stuff like that. We're now having to back off mileage, or you know for the worst thing I think is forcing runs. Like if you have, let's say, a 10K run you have to do, and but you're like, I woke up too late and now I have to go force a 10K run and I'm gonna run it as hard as I can in order to get it done. That's where I see the biggest issue. And so I don't give, as a rule, my amateurs, I don't give them daily run distances and stuff like that because I want them to plan their own runs and listen to their life schedule as well. Because I don't want to have, oh yeah, John said I had to do 10K today, and then they're like, all right, I'm gonna go hammer 10K because
Hmm.
I have a meeting at 8 a.m. or something like that, and same thing with the pros. And they're just talking through it and having conversations. If, same thing with like data match. If I notice one of my amateurs has done 20 miles on Monday, I'm going to be like, hey, what's going on? Like you only have 30 miles planned for the week. Why do we go so far? And,
Hmm.
it's again, it's teaching them. And my goal is to kind of put myself out of a job, if you will, so that
Yeah.
they have gone through these experiences and have seen what works, what doesn't work, and kind of can understand that. But yeah, generally, easy run pace should be conversational and it shouldn't be super difficult. And I think the biggest thing is sometimes putting the ego aside. If you're running with a group that's, you want to run with them, but, maybe you're really tired from the workout the day before or something, it's probably going to be best to back off a hair.
And there's a question that I always ask people who are on here, because I feel
Mhm.
like the long run is solved in so many different ways, right?
Yes.
And if we think about it, since this is a marathon podcast, in a marathon block, how do you usually go around that? What does a typical long run look like, or do you even have a typical long run?
Normal long runs are just talent feet, right? That's generally how we'll look at it. If an athlete is, you know, craving more or looking for more intensity within their week, a long run's a great spot to add it in. And usually it's going to be in a fartlek style. I don't like giving intervals during workouts because it breaks it up, obviously. I think it kind of defeats the purpose a little bit. And so, yeah, we might say, okay, let's do three 10-minute pickups with, 2 minutes jog between or something like that after 30 minutes or something like that. But generally, as a rule, easy long runs are just the same pace as easy runs. Again, if the group you're running with, both as an amateur or professional, is starting to pick it up a little bit, you're welcome to do that. The conversation I have, as long as you're ready to go for the next session, right? If that's Tuesday, great. If that's, another day, that's fine too, right? It's all about just making sure that you're recovering and, right, kind of referencing back to that mental and physical gas tank is we don't want to be dipping into either one too much. If we are, then that's where we have to kind of reconsider or move the week around. If the long run intensity is really important to an athlete and it's helping them build confidence, then yeah, we're gonna keep it in there, but in a more structured manner probably. And so yeah, and then we obviously have like marathon specific workouts or long progressions into long runs. That's a great way to build strength and kind of prepare, practice fueling and all of that. So when somebody's doing a marathon, that they feel confident in that aspect.
Yeah, love that. I think that's it's really cool, and I think that yeah, I really like your approach on the giving the athletes what they feel like they need in a way of as long as it doesn't go too far away from what you believe in, obviously. But yeah, it's a cool approach, and it's easy to understand why your athletes are succeeding. So it's cool to see how it reflects that. Last like
Thank you.
training specific question that I have for you is
Hmm.
strength training, because that's something that I
Yeah.
kind of neglected in the beginning when I started running. I
Hmm.
thought that as a speed skater I don't need that, and then learned the hard way that I did.
Yeah.
What is how big of a part of your philosophy and training is strength training?
Yeah, so I kind of take a bit of a unique approach to it is um I I see myself like I understand some of the basics of strength training. I'm not a certified strength and conditioning coach or anything like that. And so I try to push my athletes towards the professionals in that aspect, right? I'm by by training, by definition, a running coach. And so obviously there's strength aspects to that. In the same way, I'm not a PT or, a sports psych or anything like that. And so usually what I'll do is I push my athletes pretty quickly to somebody who's going to be an expert in that. I was allergic to the gym basically when I was running, and I hated going to the weight room. I just despise it, right? And so I'm definitely quick to say, I could write a generalized strength and conditioning program for somebody who's a runner. But you know, especially if we're not working in person, I'm not going to know all their weaknesses, right? And I think I want to see them get the best return on their investment when it comes to time in the gym because, time is precious, whether it's as a pro, right? You need to be recovering and stuff like that, or if you're working a normal 9 to 5 job, right? Spending 2 hours in the gym that are only 30 minutes are effective for you isn't necessarily going to be helpful, right? And so I really push people towards their, local like running PT or a strength and conditioning coach who understands running and stuff like that. And because that can be really helpful. And then we basically, they might say, "Hey, listen, this is what they gave me," and I'll be like, "Yeah, that looks good to me." Or if it's like, "Oh yeah, you're only bench pressing, and we're trying to max out on the bench," I might be like, I don't know if this PT is probably the right fit for you potentially, right? Or a strength and conditioning coach is the right fit for you, right? But that's kind of the way I look at it is I'm always happy to give my thoughts and opinions, but I really do caveat it with, hey, listen, this is not my like area of expertise. I'm gonna push you towards somebody whose their sole job is to make you stronger or make sure that you're staying injury free, and that's just not my like full area of expertise. And I've like I said, I've gained a wealth of knowledge in that area having worked with athletes who've gone through injury cycles and stuff like that. But I definitely rely to the medical professional on that side of things as well. So
Yeah, that's cool. I think it's cool to see where are your strengths and where where do you
mhm.
lack skills on that. Like,
Mhm.
but in terms of if you think of it overall in the training plan or program, how
Yeah.
many times a week will you like tell Rory, say Rory or Philly to go to the gym and have those. I've seen that Philly, for instance, she's
Yeah.
had much more and a different approach to strength training this block than she's
Mhm.
previously had. It seems like, and more core.
Yeah. Yeah. So I mean, strength training from like a gym standpoint, generally it's about 2 times a week, 3 times a week. Um but they're also doing a ton of, band exercise, like stuff that you don't need a gym for necessarily.
Exactly. Yeah.
And so, yeah, that's something that can be really, helpful in that aspect of, just because they're not going to the gym doesn't mean they're not doing little strength
No.
routines. And yeah, and that's one thing that's great as well is everybody on my team generally has a different strength coach, for better or for worse, right? It helps me, as I talk with their strength coaches and stuff like that. I get to learn again. That's kind of me being a sponge again, is me learning like the different philosophies and what they feel like works and what a weaknesses of a certain athlete is and stuff like that. So, but yeah, just generally curious.
Hmm. John, through this conversation that we've had, I can't help
Mhm.
but feel intrigued and be like, oh, maybe I should have reached out, to you as a coach. And I know that you're not just taking on pros, and I'm curious about your take, because
Mhm.
so the one thing is that I have this project that I think it's cool if I'm able to self coach myself to 225. That's just like my
Absolutely.
ego talking. But
Yeah.
but then the other part is that I feel like I have so many days where I'm like, oh, I know my body the best. So I feel,
Mm.
say, tired, or I feel a niggle, and I take a day off, and I feel like I'm being smart about it. I don't know if I am, but
Mhm.
it works. And then I'm
Mhm.
like, well, if I had a coach, I just would hate to tell that coach that, oh, but I'm feeling something today, or I'm like this today, or this week wasn't perfect. And so
Mhm.
to me, but also to other people listening to this, whether it's being coached by you or other coaches, what would you say, and what is your approach to this when your athletes are having these niggles, or not a perfect week, to say put it that way?
Yeah. No, that's definitely, it's funny. Another way of kind of phrasing what you phrased is you don't want to ignore your coach, right? Is kind of that,
Yeah.
right? And yeah, so yeah, that's their job, right? That's my this is my full-time job is to be a coach, right?
Hmm.
And so whether hopefully some of my athletes are listening and they hear this, right? Is it's never a bother, right? That's how I see it is I have I have athletes that message me almost every day, right? Or call me some of the pros call me every day and stuff like that to talk through things. And that's never a bother, right? Before this conversation, I was on the call for 45 minutes with one of my athletes, partially just catching up, seeing how they were doing, but also, talking through, how they're feeling and all of that. And so, yeah, it's really that's what we're there for, right? We're there to help. And, you know, the job of a coach, I use this analogy as, if you're standing looking at a mural, right? But the athlete's nose is literally pressed up against the wall, right? They're not going to see the whole picture, right? They're just going to see a few colors here or there. And I feel like my job as a coach is to kind of pull them back and show them the whole picture, right? Whether, let's take an example of, middle of a build, you get a little bit of an injury, your Achilles get tight or something like that, and being like, hey, listen, we had 8 weeks of great work before this, and since then we've had 6 weeks of great work, and realizing that it's those 2 weeks or that 10 days or whatever, right, doesn't dictate, how this entire build has gone. And so, yeah, that's the job of a coach is I tend to have more experience going through marathons with people as compared to my individual athletes because I see so many of them, right? I see so many marathon, so many builds, so many races and stuff like that. And yeah, that's what I'm here for. I'm here to guide, to help, to walk you through. And again, how I coach is it's a collaboration, right? And it's a risk tolerance, right? That's a big thing as well. Is realizing, I have had athletes go into a build or go into a marathon with some injuries. And it's like, hey, listen, we have to talk about that, right? We have to talk about like, hey, if your Achilles starts hurting, we really need to consider of like whether finishing the race is the right call if it's starting to really get worse and you're hobbling and stuff like that, and talking through that to hopefully make you feel more comfortable and being like, yeah, we've talked about that. I know what to do. It's not going to be a surprise. It's not just sweeping something under the rug and ignoring it because, at the end of the day, I've raced plenty of times myself where, yeah, it feels like a detriment if an athlete or if a coach doesn't talk to you about like everything that might possibly happen, within the reasonable realm of possibilities, right? And it's helpful to hear it and just kind of be like, yeah, no, like we're in a 5K. I had a coach tell me once, we're in a 5K. Be ready for it to hurt 1,200 meters in. And that kinda took me back, and I was like, "Oh, it might hurt a lot." He's like, "It's gonna hurt a lot at 1,200." And it was funny because I got to 2K and it didn't start hurting at 2K, and I was like, "Wow, I'm doing great," and but I was ready for it to hurt at 1,200 meters, and that was so helpful to hear it's like, yeah, no, it's tough work, and, realizing that going left foot, right foot isn't always the most fun, it's difficult at times.
I think yeah, I would say I needed to hear that, and I think that is like maybe the most eye-opening thing someone said, like in terms of what you were saying about not being an annoying athlete, because I
Yeah,
feel like that would be my, at least for me, a big issue of, I have a job, I have things that are happening, and there will be days where
yeah.
I I I think that sometimes I end up wanting to please people too much, and then I
Mhm.
push myself on the days that I shouldn't, or I I I would have been maybe too caught up with, okay, I need to make John happy rather than make my body happy, which is
Yeah.
not a good comment, or not a good approach, I guess.
Yeah, and I think that is something I struggle with, right? Because as a coach, right, people, whether it's from previous coaching relationships or, just kind of, people being people pleasers, right? Whatever it may be, they don't want to upset me by being like, hey, listen, something's bothering me. Or, hey, listen, I wasn't able to do this right. It's okay, right? Like, I have it with my pros where they're like, hey, listen, I was feeling really down today, or I was feeling really anxious today, or whatever it may be, and I didn't get out for my first run, or I didn't get out for my run today, and that's totally fine. I'm more like in that case, I'm more concerned about you as like, are you okay? Right? Or is like, are you doing all right? Like, how are we feeling? Right? Just to make sure, like, as again, as a friend, I want to check in on you to make sure that like we're feeling better. And so yeah, and that's how I feel across the board, right? If I had an athlete go through a really stressful time in life, and I think we were in the midst of a marathon build, and basically for a month they weren't able to train because life had gotten so stressful for them. And I was like, we're fine. Don't worry about it. We're all good. Like, I let me figure it out. We'll talk about it, right? We'll figure it out. And I tell that to all my athletes. If any point you're feeling really anxious, no matter what like tier or plan they're on or anything, if you're feeling anxiety or real worry or stress around a race, let me know and we're gonna jump on a call. Like, I will spend an hour on a call talking through to make sure you're getting off of that call feeling much better and seeing kind of my perspective of things of like, hey, listen, these are the good, these are the bad. And I'm always honest with an athlete as well. And I think that's sometimes in the short term that can be hard for them, but I think in the long term they appreciate it because they know I'm not gonna sugarcoat something for the sake of sugarcoating something, right? Just to make them feel better, right? Like, oh yeah, you're just go for sub 3, and they're like, wow, that's like an hour PR for me. I'm like, yeah, you feel like you can go for it, right? No, that's just not how. That's not what you pay me for. To be honest, you pay me to be honest and to help you. And but yeah, absolutely. Like, it's never. I've never seen a message from an athlete and been like disappointed in them. I've always been like, I hope they're okay, right? Or I hope everything is okay because I want to make sure that I care about them as a human, not as like the athlete. Because yeah, and I've had athletes with that leave because they're like, hey, listen, I feel like with your training, I'm not as much. Not being able to be part of the community as much, and that's fine. Please, like, please go. I want you to be happy. I really want you to enjoy running to the most. And we aren't always able to do running forever, and that's like we need to take advantage of it for as long as we can.
I love that. I think that's a great way to end like our conversation. But I would just want to give you, like, like a last chance to, or first, before I ask you to do it, do you still take on athletes? So like, yeah.
Yes.
So if
Yep.
people want to,
Absolutely.
like, listening to
Mhm.
this and they're intrigued, kind of like I am right now, well,
Yeah.
how do they reach out? Where can like, where do they contact you to start the conversation?
Yep. Verdetrackclub.com is my website. You can sign up there. You can check out the different training plans there. Um, Go Green XC is my personal Instagram, and then there's Verde Track Club is our like the professional page. I'm trying to be a little bit more active on them because I'm so bad at Instagram. But if you have any if people have questions about training plans or how things work or anything like that, john@verdetrackclub.com is my email. That's generally the best place to reach me. I can be slow at responding to people, and so I apologize if I am. Just text me, email me again if I miss your email after a couple days or something. Sometimes, yeah, things get busy, but yeah, check us out. Yeah, more than happy to talk to people and make sure it's a right fit. Again, that's one thing I'll say is I recognize I'm not the coach for everybody, and that's okay, right? Talk to multiple coaches, ask coaches, and figure out who's going to be the best fit for you, and yeah, go from there.
Cool. I'll also add the website and the link in the show notes so people can just
Thank you.
head over there. John, thank you so much for your time in the conversation. I really, really appreciate it, and I learned a lot, so appreciate that.
Thank you. And yeah, I'm excited to follow the journey.
Thank you. And now that you've listened to this, you probably understand why I might want to work with John. I'm really, really intrigued. I am so excited to have a chat with John in 2 days' time, which is actually the day of this podcast coming out. I think that it's super cool to hear his approach to running. It was an eye-opener when he said what he said about, athletes being worried about being annoying, and that's not how he looks at it. So kind of, a bit of a game changer for me, I guess, at least in terms of the mindset. So we'll see what that ends up with. You will obviously hear when we get closer, when I've had a talk with John. Really hope that I can get back to running soon, because now I'm tired of being sick, and it's less than 10 weeks until Valencia, and I need to get back on my feet. Thank you so much for listening to the Marathon Podcast. Really, really appreciate that. And thank you again for all the nice messages that I've been receiving over the last few weeks. Please give this podcast a review if you liked it, and I'll talk to you in the next one. You listen to the Marathon Podcast, brought to you by Wild Studio.